Good afternoon, everyone. Woo! I hope you all have had a great morning and an afternoon, and I'm so excited to welcome you all to UC Berkeley. And on behalf of the entire UC Berkeley Haas community, we are so excited that you get to experience this wonderful weather here in Berkeley, California. We've already had an incredible lineup of panels and speakers, and we are thrilled to welcome our friends, colleagues, and MBA students from across the country. I'm Amy Chan, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Haas, and I'd like to give a special thanks to our sponsors, Google, Republic Services, Bakar Climate Labs, McKinsey, Marathon Capital, Replenish, Pacifico Energy, Charm, Bay Area Trash Compactors, Ground Force Enterprises, Greener by Default, Impossible Foods, Chunk, and Cal Zero Waste for making this event possible. Yes, big round of applause. Before we get started, we want to begin with a land acknowledgement to honor the land that we are on. UC Berkeley Haas recognizes that our university sits on the territory of Huyun, the original landscape of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Varana band of Alameda County. This region continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Varana band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. As members of the Berkeley community, it is vitally important that we not only recognize the history of the land on which we stand, but also we recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the Berkeley and broader Bay Area communities today. Okay, and with that, I am so honored to introduce one of the most inspiring leaders at Berkeley to welcome us all and give us opening remarks. I introduce UC Berkeley Haas Interim Dean Jenny Chatman to share. Thank you and enjoy the event.
Hey, ClimateCAP 2025, welcome to Berkeley. We're glad to see you here. We've been planning for quite some time to see you all. We're just thrilled that it's all a reality today. I heard that tickets sold out in 8 minutes when we put them on. Yeah, so thank you all for your support and for coming. We're just so excited to have you on campus to explore, to discuss, to develop action plans for what we all can do to address climate change. Before we begin, I wanted to give our sustainability team a big round of applause. Amy, Danner, Kat, Ku'u, and our ClimateCAP student leaders. Can you all raise your hands so we can? Thank you. Thank you, guys. Fantastic. They've been planning for a year and they've really outdone themselves. I believe you're going to leave this conference feeling totally inspired to tackle the biggest climate challenges of our time. And that's good because you represent the next generation of climate leaders. In fact, our collective future is in your capable and ingenious hands. Something you may not know about the Haas School of Business is that we live by 4 defining leadership principles. Question the status quo, confidence without attitude, students always, and beyond yourself. These are codified and they're integrated into everything that we do. We believe so strongly in them that we've carved them into the side of our building and the patio of our courtyard. We have 180 different processes with these defining leadership principles. Our faculty are evaluated according to the defining leadership principles. We have themed events around the defining leadership principles. I was just at an event last week where we had cocktails around our defining leadership principles. We have wine with our defining leadership principle label, because this is California after all. And in fact, I've been visiting with our alumni all over the country, and at least 3 have told me that they're raising their children according to the DLPs. I see these defining leadership principles in you. Thank you for questioning the status quo and going beyond yourselves, 2 of our 4 DLPs, to heal the earth and develop sustainable ways of living into the future. So, if you read the news or scroll through social media, I mean, did I say if? I don't know. It doesn't sound like if is the question. When you read these things, you would know that California is no stranger to extreme weather disasters. In January, we all watched in horror as the Palisades and Eaton wildfires ravaged Los Angeles. I was just down this week visiting with our 4,000 Los Angeles alumni of Haas, and it has completely penetrated that community. More than 37,000 acres were scorched, 16,000 structures were destroyed, 30 people died. In 1991, just a few miles south of Berkeley Haas, and my own home, a wildfire broke out in the Oakland Hills. I'm trying to think where we are right now, so it would be that direction, yes. The fire, fueled by dry pine needles and high winds, a typical combination, was so intense that within an hour, almost 800 buildings were in flames. One of our most beloved faculty members, Professor Nancy Wallace, lived in the hills, and she narrowly escaped the fire with her husband and her cat. While they were fortunate to make it out alive, others didn't. 25 people were killed in the fire, 150 were injured, 2,900 homes were burned. A personal catastrophe like this might have stopped most people, but Nancy went beyond herself and got her students always on. Nancy, who's one of our country's leading experts on mortgage markets, teamed up with engineers, climate scientists, and economists across UC Berkeley. This is what we're great at, assembling great minds, to create game theoretic models to better predict wildfire risk. The models she and her team developed quantify the risk of loss in the fire insurance and mortgage capital markets, which are very, very challenged these days. What's more, her former students have gone on to create climate-focused companies and climate tech products like Firebreak, which is an app that identifies ways to reduce wildfire risk around your home and property, which I use. I have homes here and in Lake Tahoe, 2 very fire-threatened areas. I share this story because Nancy's research is a perfect example of innovation. And here comes another defining leadership principle, being based on students always. And our final DLP, confidence without attitude. This is unique to Berkeley and to Haas. And we really try to walk the talk here at Berkeley Haas, where innovation meets impact. Here are just a couple of examples of how we try to do that. We've embedded sustainability into our curriculum. I went online last night and counted 27 classes in our MBA program that are deeply based on climate science and sustainability. This fall 24, we launched a brand new joint program with our College of Natural Resources, the MBA Masters in Climate Solutions, to prepare the next generation of climate leaders. These students are going to lead climate strategy, carbon accounting, and clean technology investments. These outstanding students are here today. If you are an MBA, MCS, if you could raise your hand. I'm sure we have some here. There's 1. There's 2. Yeah. 3. Awesome. You should talk to these folks. Learn what they're thinking about and studying. And we have many students across our MBA programs who are deeply invested in sustainability and climate. A third thing that we've done is we constructed Chu Hall, which I know some of the sessions are occurring over there. This was the first academic building in the country to be zero waste certified. And the building retains its beauty, even though it's now 8 years old. It is really an incredible building. And there's much, much more. So the question is, how should you spend your precious time these 2 days here at the ClimateCAP conference at Berkeley Haas, and importantly, when you return to your campuses? Here's my humble advice. Number 1, get your scrappy on. This is hard and complicated work. It's not always recognized as important. It's not always well-funded, especially now. You're gonna have to be scrappy. Number 2, revel and lean into this community, its fundamental values, and the unrelenting belief that we need to act now to make a difference. Number 3, and it's right up here. Oh, that's just me, sorry. Okay. I don't usually get to wear red, actually, so yeah. Lead with resilience, right, which is the theme of this conference. You've already demonstrated your brilliance, your leadership capacity, your commitment. So there's literally no reason why you can't make a significant impact on climate adaptation and mitigation. And number 4, collaborate with people across disciplines. Climate adaptation and mitigation are complex, multifaceted problems. You need to draw strength from diverse types of expertise and experience to address the challenge. So you want to find the people who complement your talents. And I'm not saying the people who tell you you look nice. What I mean is the people who challenge your ideas, but in so doing will make your ideas much, much better. That's when amazing things happen. That's the research I've done all my life. As the next generation of business leaders, you're uniquely positioned to bring together top talent and develop promising innovations that will address climate change. There are over 500 MBA students from 30 schools here. Connect with them, build those relationships. And I'll just close with, and I'm gonna draw on the Haas folks here and the Berkeley folks here. Can I get a Go Bears on 3? Okay, this is a custom, a ritual that we use. Okay, is everybody ready? And it needs to be worthy of this large room. 1, 2, 3, Go Bears! All right, thank you.
Hello! Go Bears! One more time, Go Bears! One more time, Go Bears! All right, I like that. I am Robert Strand, and for the last 10 years I've had the privilege to be the Executive Director of the Center for Responsible Business at Berkeley Haas. We are the proud sponsors of a few of the food-focused panels here at ClimateCAP. I'm also the Executive Director of the Nordic Center at UC Berkeley and a member of Berkeley Haas faculty. Teach some classes called Sustainable Capitalism in the Nordics, ? Where we go to Copenhagen. Any Copenhagen students who will be coming with me in a couple weeks in the room. Back there, back here, you should have come to Berkeley Haas. We'd go to Copenhagen together and learn about sustainability leading practices, but that's for another conversation, maybe over a drink here. My role in this event, I'm the human hook. And with my good friend and colleague Persis Sparrow right there, I'm pointing to all of you speakers. We're gonna work to keep you on time. And so with that, our first panel that I'd love to introduce here, it is our energy transformation. So panelists, if you can kindly make your way to the stage, and I will announce you as you come. Carla Peterman, Executive Vice President, Corporate Affairs and Chief Sustainability Officer at PG&E. Urvi Parekh, Head of Global Energy at Meta. Anna Martinez, Co-Founder at Exploration Partners and Associate Director at Haas's Cleantech to Market program. Please join me in a warm, upfront welcome.
All right, can you hear me? Okay, great. Oh, now it's on. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Energy Transition Panel. As mentioned, I'm Ana Martinez. I'm the Associate Director for Cleantech to Market, also known as C2M, which is part of the Energy Institute here at Haas. And I'm honored to be moderating this exciting session around the future of energy and sustainability, and here joined by two remarkable leaders that have really unique perspectives on this critical topic. So Urvi is joining us, who leads the energy transition strategy for Meta and really focuses on the growing fleets of data centers that they are growing to meet this demand. And also focus on your Meta's 100% renewable clean energy goals. And Carla, who is responsible for leading the energy strategy for PG&E and focuses on PG&E's goal of having a net zero energy system by 2040. And so for those that are not from California, PG&E is California's largest energy utility, so you have that in context, and we're really excited to have you both here today. Thank you so much. So we'll jump right in to keep things on time. By the way, I forgot to mention Urvi is a Haas alumni, and Carla is a UC Berkeley alumni as well, so thank you for coming back to Berkeley. So our first question is for Carla. One of PG&E's goals is to deliver decarbonized electricity 24/7, 365 days a year. This is obviously a really ambitious goal. So what strategies and innovations are you deploying in order to make this a reality?
Thanks, Anna. Good to be with all of you today. And so as you noted, I'm with PG&E. And so for sense of scale, we serve 1 in 20 Americans electricity and gas. And so really this opportunity to have a net zero emissions energy system across electric and gas by 2040, 5 years before the state goal, really allows us the opportunity to decarbonize at scale. And then we also have the benefit in our service area of having a lot of distributed technologies. So 1 in 5 rooftop solar systems are in our utility service area, 1 in 7 electric vehicles. And so we really have this opportunity to integrate those technologies as a part of the solution. So in terms of how we're going to get to 2040, well, first of all, why are we even doing it? We're doing it because it's the best outcome for our customers, both on actual use of energy in terms of efficiency, in terms of the environmental impact, and then affordability. We forecast in 2040 our customers' overall energy bills, what they spend on transportation, heating, lighting, will be 30% lower because of the efficiency of electrification. And so when we look to 2040, we have some key strategies. We know we need to electrify more, including transportation. We also know that we need to increase our amount of clean energy, but we also have to do load management. We have to have efficient energy use given the scale. And so in terms of what we're focused on now, we're really focused on what are those things that really have to scale to be building blocks for 2040. And so one area, for example, is transportation electrification. But it's not just electric vehicles. We need those electric vehicles to be able to provide energy back to the grid, really serve as a form of storage. So for example, last year, one of the things that we did in Oakland, California, the neighboring city to Berkeley, is electrify the entire Oakland School District bus fleet. And so this bus fleet not only is electric, which is better for the students, but it also serves as an energy storage resource that puts power back to the grid. Another building block we need for 2040 are electric buildings. But we just don't need electric buildings. We need them to be electric, and we have to be able to remove the gas system underneath. Otherwise, it's really costly. So we're focused on how you electrify neighborhoods and zones. So we were supportive of legislation that was passed this past year in California that provides a framework for how we can go about electrifying communities and removing the obligation eventually to serve gas. And so these are just a couple of examples of some of the work that we're doing at scale, and there are many more we can speak about.
That's super exciting. Thanks for sharing. Similar around the needs for electrification. So, Urvi, I was surprised to learn that 95% of Meta's electricity consumption actually comes from your data centers. So as this will continue to grow, especially as a result of the AI boom, how do you expect to achieve the consumption demands while also maintaining your sustainability goals?
Yeah, well, it's great to see everyone here, and I always love talking to students. I think it's, I remember sitting in these seats, so it's a welcome to come back and see my old school. As Anna said, I lead Meta's energy team, and as part of that role, when I joined 8.5 years ago, Meta was committed to reaching 100% clean energy on a much smaller fleet of data centers than we have today. We hit that goal in 2020, and our commitment said that we would stay at 100% clean energy even as our consumption of electricity continued to grow. And so as we've scaled the program, we now have executed agreements with 14,000 megawatts of clean energy, the majority of which is in the United States, and 9,000 megawatts of which is operating. So those are projects, wind and solar projects, that wouldn't have been constructed except for the fact that Meta is using its balance sheet and its commitment to buy electricity in order to ensure that that power is built and then put onto the grid to start operating. And so to continue with the transition that we have of the growth that the US expects to see from data centers, electrification, manufacturing growth, we're continuing to think about how do we strategically deploy more and more power plants. And now that conversation is increasingly with our utilities. So historically, utilities that we work with had typically seen 1% to 3% of electricity growth a year, and now they're telling us it's double digits. And in the next 4 years, they see an incredible amount of increase in consumption. And so when we go and talk to a utility about a new data center, we suddenly have a different conversation to have. It's not just about how can we plug in, it's about how are you as a utility going to grow for the next decade, and what is the role that Meta can have in that conversation. So we've done about 6,000 megawatts of clean energy where the utility has signed those contracts on our behalf. And the utility then puts those resources into its planning models. It thinks about what other generation it would have acquired and uses this to displace some of it, and we bear all the costs because we don't want other ratepayers to be harmed by our decision that we want to be 100% clean energy. So those are some strategies that we continue to think about and want to deploy. And in addition, we have to think about what technologies, we're going to need a diverse set of carbon-free resources in order to get to where we want to be as a country. And so as we think about that, it has Meta thinking more about emerging technologies, which I know we're going to talk about later, and about what is the resource mix that's needed, especially right now when growth is so high that we need all of the above of power options.
Yeah, that's great to hear that you're still committing to your goals even as AI continues to boom. So this is a great segue to the next question, which is for PG&E. As consumption is increasing of energy due to the two topics that we've talked about, the AI boom, but also the electrification of every sector, including the transportation, how is PG&E thinking about grid modernization while maintaining reliability and affordability for customers?
Yeah, so it's a great question. One of the areas I lead at PG&E is rates. That's one of my things in my portfolio, and so very focused on affordability. And we have seen, as utilities are trying to meet higher demand, we're seeing increases in rates. We've seen the significant increase in our rates over the last couple of years as we've been investing as well in climate adaptation, particularly on wildfire investment. And happy to say that our average residential rate now is flat to last year, which is something we've been working really hard on, and we know we have to keep bending that curve down. And so the way we approach it, we call it our simple, affordable model. Sounds like a marketing tagline, but it's just an easy kind of thing to remember. And I think this is a good recipe for the country as we scale. And really the premise behind this is, as there is more demand, we have to invest in more infrastructure to modernize the grid as well as to be able to respond to climate change. So how do you afford to do those investments while at the same time not having customer bills grow faster than the rate of inflation? And the way we are doing that is to make those investments, but to pay for them by reducing O&M. You know, how do you pull expenses out of the business? How do you do the work at lower cost? We're also working on efficient financing. So being open to alternative ways to fund the system. So whether it's actually capitalizing on individual customer investments in electric vehicles to be a form of storage, or going after other sources of funding. We've been the recipient of a $15 billion DOE loan guarantee to support low interest financing of our grid build out. And then also, the final key part for us is investing in new load, because we know when we bring new load online, that helps to reduce the cost for all customers if we're able to make sure that we're spreading those fixed costs. We call that beneficial load. So data centers, for example, our commitment around powering data centers in our service area, that it is beneficial. So we estimate that for every 1,000 megawatts of data center load we bring on, that can put downward pressure of 1% to 2% on all other customer bills. With electric vehicles, the economics are even better. Bringing 1,000 megawatts of electric vehicle load online can reduce customer bills by 2 to 3%. But we have to be very intentional around our cost structure, and we are deploying in order to make those economics work.
That's a really interesting approach. I hadn't thought about it. So as Jenny mentioned, not if, but when we read the news, what we're seeing is other tech companies like Google that are investing in nuclear energy. I think a lot of us are interested in that topic. So we'd love to hear your thoughts about how nuclear energy is going to fit into your clean energy strategy.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. So when Meta set a 100% clean energy goal, at that time, really there weren't many technologies that could fall under that umbrella that were commercially available. And today, when I mentioned the 14,000 megawatts of clean energy that Meta's executed agreements with, that has all been wind and solar. And we continue to do a tremendous volume of wind and solar annually to keep pace. But as we look in the long term, what we've heard and what we've seen in the data is that in order to hit a truly decarbonized grid, we need clean, firm resources that are going to help us to decarbonize in the hours when wind and solar isn't able to produce. And so today, the lowest hanging fruit, the technology that can get online the fastest continues to be wind and solar. I think 90% of new power plants built last year were wind and solar power plants. And so then what at Meta we've been thinking about is when we run as hard as we can, and we need additional power plants coming online, what are the technologies that are reaching commercial readiness the fastest? And that has caused us to narrow in on enhanced geothermal, advanced nuclear, and long duration energy storage as the ones that we really are focused on and thinking about enabling. Back in December, we made a very big announcement that Meta was coming out with an RFP to try to partner to create 1 to 4 gigawatts, so 1 to 4,000 megawatts of nuclear, advanced nuclear projects that would be new construction and added to power grids all over the US. And we are in the midst of evaluating all the partnerships that can make that happen. And the approach that we took there was to acknowledge that in the end, nuclear projects that will have a useful life of 30 to 60 years, it is going to be highly important. We as a tech company are not owner-operators of power plants, that for us to be really successful in this space, we think that the partnerships with owner-operators is going to be very, very important to us. And so right now, the goal is to go sites first and find locations. As many of you know in this room, Nuclear Regulatory Commission approvals are one of the long poles in the tent in order to make new nuclear happen. And so our goal is to find partnerships where Meta can be partnering either through capital or through our demand for electricity in order to create the certainty needed for these power plants to go through this multi-year process and do all of the engineering, design, permitting work that's going to be needed in order to bring nuclear on faster. And one of the things that we've said clearly is give us a sense of what could we do to accelerate? What would make this problem? What could we do to flatten the grass so that you get there faster? And so we're really excited about this, and I think what we realize is there's innovative technology behind it, but a lot of this technology is forms of nuclear that have been used before, and so I think that that gives us a lot of hope that we'll see a lot of progress here.
That's super exciting to hear because I think there is a lot of uncertainty in the market around nuclear energy, but I do think data centers could be a really nice early use case that could help to de-risk this technology in the long term. So actually, Carla, since you're from a very different perspective, would also love to hear what you think around nuclear energy and for your strategy for PG&E.
So first of all, I kid you not, I was on a panel probably at UC Berkeley 15 years ago, and a nuclear engineer raised his hand, a student, and he said, "What about nuclear?" And I said, "Study something else." Because at the time, we weren't looking at it. I mean, we were at the point of saying that we were no longer going to be investing in this technology, and we are seeing a renaissance. And so for our utility, California has some limits right now on building new nuclear, but we own the one existing nuclear plant in the state, which was due to be shut down this past year. And it provides 10% of the state's power, 20% of the carbon-free power. And so what we saw was we were due to close it, and then within a 6-month period, there was legislation passed to have us keep it open just in the nick of time, because there was a recognition of the importance of keeping online as much carbon-free energy as possible given the demand. And so I do think we need to be open, not just for a diversity of technologies, but how can we look at the technologies that we have and make sure that they can have a longer life. So for us, we got an extension with our nuclear facility. We also are doing upgrades on our hydro assets. We own the largest investor-owned utility hydroelectric fleet. We're looking at repowering. And one thing to think about, though, is even with existing, you have to treat it differently. So what we saw is because nuclear was not in fashion, we saw a real decline in the available workforce. And so now we're starting to see people talk about how do you use AI to do some of the different responsibilities that you might have at a nuclear facility, and how do you start retraining the workforce, but also enabling them given just the need to scale at the level that Urvi is talking about.
That's great. So it sounds like a great opportunity for MBAs potentially go into nuclear. Sounds like there's a lot of opportunities there. So this actually brings us to our final question that will be for both of you. So if you had 1 to 2 pieces of advice that you'd like to share with MBA students that are really passionate about sustainability, but also really want to make an impact, what would you like to share? And maybe Urvi will start with you.
Okay. I love this question because Carla and I were both sitting in these seats, right, 15 plus years ago. And I have a couple of thoughts. I would say every single one of you in here needs to work on climate. I think you should realize that the number of MBAs and the number of people who are going to be needed in this sector is immense. And even if every single one of you and you brought a friend along, it would still not be enough. So I'd say that is the first thing. That's the call to action I have. Find what you do really well and find a way to apply it to climate. And I'll say when we were both in grad school, one of the things that I noticed is the role I have today didn't exist then. If I had thought about what is the role for MBAs when I finished at Berkeley, I would never have taken the risks that it's taken to get to where I am today. And so I think that the reason you all are here is because you're willing to take a risk on yourselves by coming back and getting a degree, and you're willing to invest in your education. I want to encourage you, knowing that it's really hard to come out and not be certain of what that career path is going to be, to continue to take those risks and think really widely about the challenges we have. How are we going to get to a decarbonized grid? How are we going to get to a decarbonized world? There are so many pathways that I hear talked about that people are studying at Berkeley that just I didn't even get talked about when I was here. So when you're 15 years from now and you're sitting in this chair, I want you to be able to talk through your journey and realize that it wasn't all laid out. And the fundamentals were so important. I was talking to Jean Chatman, a lot of what she said really resonated with me, that when I got to Cal, I'd come out of an engineering degree, I had worked in federal policy, the idea of business, I knew nothing about it. I took Nancy Wallace's mortgage-backed securities class, and that taught me how to financial model. And that is the stuff, I went and ended up working in financing of solar power plants. That stuff was useful. It made a big difference. It was the understanding my fundamental skills and then just applying it to problems we never solved before. I think we built the first gigawatt of solar power plants, one of the first gigawatts of solar power plants in California. This is almost 20 years ago. And at that time, like the idea of doing 6 square miles of solar panels to provide power to Los Angeles was unheard of. So I expect to see a lot of really big accomplishments from the folks in this room, and I think that you're in the right place to be here networking with people My husband works in climate. He and I met at Berkeley, and his co-founder was an MBA that he met and in his MBA class. And they've gone on to raise $1 billion for their company. So it happens, the people you meet here, you'll continue to stay in touch with because it is still a pretty small industry.
Carla?
Yeah, we buy power from them. So it is a small world. I mean, first of all, just picking up where Urvi left off, when I talk about we have a 2040 vision, we have these building blocks, I am sure that actually what we're going to need in 2040 will look different than we think. And we are going to require, everyone in their carbon plan has some unknown box about how they're going to get there, right? And so there was so much to learn and discover. But my advice for you is be present to the experiences that you're having now and the relationships that you're having, because they very well may be the foundation to what your future career will be. My first year in graduate school here, I was in a related PhD program. My summer internship was working at our energy regulator. And during that internship, I shadowed a commissioner and thought, what a cool job, you know? And then 10 years later, I had that job. And that ended up being the most impactful role I could have had. And then we talk about so many people who I was in school with are now leaders in the industry. So what a wonderful thing to be present right now to the impact that you're going to cause. And it makes me want to be back in that seat, except for the test. I don't want to be back there.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insight with us.
One of our panelists here was stuck in traffic. California has great weather. We also have bad traffic. So we're so happy, Jarvis, that you made it here. Jarvis Sam, CEO and founder at Renewable Disruption, and Diandra Marizet Esparza, co-founder and director of Impact at Intersectional Environmentalist. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Hello, everybody. How are we? Now, I know it's day one, but I'm going to ask you again, how are we? That's what I'm talking about. Listen, we're so excited to be joining you all today. As mentioned before, my name is Jarvis Sam. I use he, him, his pronouns. Proudly serve as the founder and CEO of an organization called the Renewable Disruption. We team up with a variety of Fortune 500 companies on their DEI strategy. So the last month has been great for me, as you can imagine. But in addition to that, I very proudly serve as a professor of practice here at the Haas School of Business. So I teach in our full-time program and our evening weekend program, Inclusive Communication for Leaders. Prior to doing this work, I've been in the DEI space for a little over 15 years now, serving as Nike's Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer previously, and then as Snapchat's very first head of DEI. And so when we talk about this concept of storytelling, it's a discussion that I know all too well. But for real systemic change to happen, we recognize the importance of the work beginning with the story. I've seen this proven true in so many different ways, but one of the clearest examples of this is the incredible work that I see led as Intersectional Environmentalist. And so I'm thrilled to moderate this discussion today, actually, for you all, with one of my esteemed colleagues and practitioners, Diandra Esparza, where we'll talk a little bit more about this concept of storytelling, how the ownership and acknowledgement of your own story is the biggest way that we rebuild, redefine, and redevelop systems. So let's jump in. How are you today, my friend?
Hey everyone. Oh, I am feeling so good. I'm also loving this citrine seat situation that's happening in here. Color of the year.
Right?
I love it. But no, I'm feeling really good. I'm also here with my co-founder, Kiana. Everybody say hello to Kiana. Hello, Kiana. Yeah, no, it is amazing. I think that the work we've been doing at IE the past few years has had just the beautiful privilege of being able to be immersed in a lot of college campuses. And so every time we get invited to spaces like this, it's really amazing because I think that students have done such a beautiful job of working within the walls of universities to really advocate for change, whether that be within curricula or whether that be really imagining how they're going to change the course of entire industries, like so proactively from the position of just being in a position of study. So it's just been really inspiring not only to be able to share our work, but to receive the feedback and the result of it, see the result of it in students. So I feel amazing to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So I want to jump into this conversation about storytelling. So we've had time to share and talk story with each other for a while. And believe it or not, there is a shared reality that Beyonce, Megan Thee Stallion, me, and Diandra all hold. We're from Houston, Texas, of course. H-Town. Exactly. And Jalen Hurts, okay?
Okay.
Go Eagles. I want to know more about your story. How did you get to IE? What is the work that you all do? I think the beauty of storytelling is that visuals help it come to life. So I think you've crafted a great visual for us too. But tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So do I have any business majors in the room? So funny enough, the first question I usually get from people is, oh my gosh, like what type of environmentalism did you focus on, or what environmental degree do you have? I'm like, girl, I have a business degree. I studied business marketing, and I'm a first generation college student, and I think that even though I was really interested in storytelling through the lens of journalism, I also really wanted to study history like you did. And I remember my parents just not really having a good sense of the world, the academic world, and just I remember always hearing, my family, so many of my uncles and my aunts were very entrepreneurial, and business was the safe space. And they were like, Mija, you're gonna be one of the first people, the first generation to get a degree, and business was the safe zone. And I think that I begrudgingly went down that path, but then fell in love with marketing, predominantly because of the power of storytelling. So even though I've had a few twists and turns in my career that exposed me really beautifully to how everything interconnects and is impacted by stories. I've been in trend analytics, I've been on the accounting and finance side, I've had to do legal work, so I've kind of done it all, and I've really, that exposure has so beautifully solidified for me that every system starts with a story.
Yeah. So let's unpack that a little bit more then with the work that you do at IE now. How do you all leverage the power of storytelling, and how have you done so historically to help inform and educate about what it truly means to exist at the intersection of multiple identities and the affect that can have on conversations around conservation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have some fun slides. Maybe we could move to the next one, and I can point out some examples as well. We can move to the next one. Thank you. So visuals are fun. We love visuals at IE, and some of the things that I've pointed out here are examples of how we've used storytelling to kind of help people understand that when it comes to the environmental justice movement, storytelling is more than just about having our voices heard. Certainly that's a really important part, but it's also about reclaiming narratives that have been written for us. One of my favorite projects to date in IE's short 4 to 5 years of existence is actually our intersectional history of environmentalism. It's the one on the bottom right that you see there. That's the cover for a YouTube video. It's around 12 to 15 minutes. Yeah. So since it's so bite-sized, it's just been so friendly for classrooms and groups and different advocacy orgs to get together and actually experience how stories have been propped up on erasure, kind of convenient truth-telling, if you will, at times, and also how stories have been used to target communities of color and other vulnerable communities. So I think that by making sure that we're really centering stories, we've also been able to expand who gets to consider themselves an environmentalist, which I think was a really, really profound thing in 2020 when the organization was founded. One of the things that we got really excited about was invitations to come and speak and work within the White House and within, again, many beautiful universities, and we're so grateful for all of that. But over time, we also started to learn that without art and beauty and storytelling, a lot of the work that I personally was doing didn't feel accessible to my cousins and my mom. And I had to kind of take inventory of why I was doing the work I was doing. And I became really, really grateful that we took such an artistic approach. And I've come across just a few stats that I remember, that I remember and I hang on to really well. So for example, stories we have found are remembered 22 times more than just facts alone, which reminds me that being able to present a story in an artistic way is part of justice. It's part of the justice movement to present empowering information to people in a way that resonates with them, in a way that embeds into the fabric of society. So art became my way, and storytelling became my way of contributing to the environmental justice movement.
I think it's so fascinating. You know, part of the reason I made the decision to study history in undergrad, actually, centered around that, is learning about certain stories using both primary and secondary source data. But the piece that often stood out to me the most is, while the facts can add a lot of content, we never really know the full essence of a story until we hear the various different vantage points and the multitude of experiences that can account for those stories. And so I want to talk next a little bit about the power of storytelling. The video clip is just one example of that. But, you know, knowing our audience and professionals from business school spaces and environments, case studies go a long way toward illuminating some of these experiences. One of the challenges with the current way in which we talk about the environmental movement and climate change more broadly is that the faces that we see oftentimes are only reflective from certain groups or specific demographics. Put simply, name for me an under 18-year-old black environmentalist. Name a young white woman. Greta, of course. We can start to name these experiences because we're able to identify them. But there's a reason that barriers to entry or opportunities to access are created for some versus not others. But the environmental justice movement holds a lot of its roots in a great story from Warren County. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you bring up a really good point, opening that with barriers to access. Yeah. So how many people are familiar with the birth of the environmental justice movement being considered to be Warren County? Yeah, a couple people. So Warren County is considered to be the birthplace of the environmental justice movement because of toxic dumping that was happening in predominantly black neighborhoods, and tells a very similar story, or sings a similar tune, if you will, to the experiences that black and brown communities have all over the country at the hands of various polluting industries. So like Houston being one of them, Louisiana, LA. And I think that what's beautiful about the story of Warren County is that so many people had to advocate, and again, barriers to entry, not having funding or resources to put together data to tell their own story. I think what I found so powerful about that story was that when trying to advocate for the community and saying, hey, we can't have all these toxins dumped in our backyard. Like, what about our kids? What about our families, our community? It was always just, well, but there's no data to prove that that's happening, or the effects of it. Where's the data? And of course, who's going to fund that data if it supports the industry to be able to dump those toxins? Yeah. And so I really think about how communities had to go out of their way, even though our communities are already struggling to make ends meet, really having to go out of our way to collect that data. And there was a report that ended up being made called the Toxic Waste and Race Report. And that report concluded and it's still used today, that report concluded that race was the #1 indicator for the placement of a toxic waste site. Yeah. And so that story, that was an example of community being able to write their own narrative about what was happening in that context. And there's so many industry examples like that. I think another example that really sparks for me is the hemp and the cannabis industry. This is a very profitable industry right now, and over the past decade, we've seen the economic implications of that growth really be funneled into white affluent communities, when it could be a really beautiful industry growth that's redirected towards reparations for the ways that black and brown communities have been targeted. So I think, when I think of storytelling and what role that plays in all of that, it makes me think about how industries like the lumber industry, for example, saw how profitable and sustainable that the hemp industry was, and they said, the hemp industry is doing really well, but we would do really well if we got to make paper out of trees instead of making it out of hemp. So when you have these economic and industry interests having the power to craft their own story and then simultaneously tarnish the story of other people, you end up having a people that have such a beautiful, rich relationship to nature, AKA in this context, the hemp industry, and then have that relationship systemically severed to prop up another industry. So I think we continue to see how stories really shift who really gets to lead storytelling. And then it prevents us from even having the resources and the time and the energy to tell our own.
What I think is so beautiful about this, and that I hope our audience is gathering as well, is this story is very actively writing itself in the moment. You see, the cyclical nature and connection of exactly what Diandra described shows up in the work that I do as a DEI practitioner, as well as the work that's happening in the environmental justice movement right now. You see, the healthcare industry did a lot of this work about a decade ago and a little bit over that, studying what's known as the social determinants of health. That same type of work and its reality is happening right now in the spaces of how we understand environmental justice movements. You see, there is a direct connection between a lot of the realizations that Diandra highlighted in the hemp and cannabis industry with certain states like Texas and Louisiana continuing to have possession of marijuana as illegal, with the highest amount of individuals that are in systems of criminality connected to that being men in black and brown bodies. There's a distinct connection between how we think about the social realities paired with political and economic discourse tied to these conversations. And so when you hear the realities of how DEI plays into conservation movements, these are the questions that you should be interrogating along the way. And yet the impact spans even further. If we go, for example, to the state of Oregon, I see a duck shirt out here in the audience. If you look at the state of Oregon and Washington, for example, where some of the largest cannabis grow-ops exist, none of that money is being funded back into trying to change or facilitate prison reform, something that we could see the connection of these even better. And what that showcases, in my opinion, is the significance also of erasure and what it means when we have revisionist histories around these topics. One of the ways to combat erasure that Diandra and I talk about all the time is this idea of narrative healing and the reclamation of culture and histories through that experience. Can you talk to us a little bit about what does that mean? What is narrative healing? How does it play out?
Yeah, absolutely. We might be able to go to the next slide. Yes, our Warren County slide. We can go to the next one. Thank you. So you might see a little baby face poking out. That's me. And I wrote a piece last year for Outside Voices, and I think that writing that piece was the first time I kind of connected the dots between the work that I do, and certainly you could categorize it under a lot of things, but the idea of narrative healing and really reclaiming your own story or your family's or your community's story to a given context. And it oftentimes addressing erasure or some sort of distortion that's meant and designed to oppress you or your community or particular identity. Doing that work was what I became really, really passionate about. And I actually became passionate about it and made that connection through the story of monarch butterflies. Yeah. So I grew up in Texas. Any Texans or Southerners in the room? Okay, hey y'all. So growing up, even though my family had a beautiful relationship with ranch life, I grew up riding horses, I had horses growing up, I would have never considered myself, and I would have never dreamed that I had an ancestry that had this beautiful relationship to land, because that's just not how environmentalists were marketed. That's not how the story was told. Yeah. And over the past few years, as I've been healing my own narrative and just trying to do a lot of narrative healing within Latina communities, for those of you who don't know, I have a Mexican background, and I started learning about the story of monarch butterflies and how they travel from middle parts of Canada all the way down to Michoacan, Mexico every fall. And this falls right around the time of Dia de Muertos. Has anyone seen the movie Coco? We love the movie Coco. Yeah. And they failed to put in more symbolism of the butterfly though, so I will tell you. So I've learned a lot about how my ancestry, which falls right along the Texas-Mexico border, how our ancestors considered monarch butterflies spirits of the forest that would usher the souls of your loved ones down to Michoacan, Mexico, or various parts of Mexico to visit you. And some people even considered the presence of the monarch butterflies, those souls reincarnate for a temporary amount of time. As we know, monarch butterflies' lifespans are fleeting. And when I think about that in an academic setting, or maybe a more scientific setting, I think, wow, I have read some interesting things about how scientists consider that life emerges from the health and the contents of the soil. Something that's kind of fun that I learned is that monarch butterflies take about 4 life cycles to make that journey. And if your ancestors and elders are buried around you, and that 4th monarch butterfly was born from the nutrients not that far from wherever you are, then who's to say that monarch butterfly isn't, in fact, carrying the remnants and the energy of your elders and your ancestors? And I think that story has really cracked open this world of narrative healing for me, because I know that so many of us come from cultural backgrounds that have beautiful stories like that, that show the scientific wisdom of our people. So that's what narrative healing is to me, and I think that the art and storytelling side of it is what reminds me that that's how those stories get preserved in people. That's how we maintain them, is making sure that our stories are fun and joyful, and that we want to tell them seasonally, every year, through things like Dia de Muertos.
Yeah. I love that. Such a powerful example. You know, I think all of us have the opportunity to understand our own journey as it relates to narrative healing and certain experiences that come from it. One of the dialogues we've talked about, you know, as a black man, an African-American man from Texas, I also find myself at the intersection of many other identities. I'm gay, like, obviously. But when you go, I mean, really? You know, like, who wouldn't? When you go on this journey of understanding how these various elements of your narrative play out to create your story, it's incredibly powerful. For my family, for example, it's been the discovery of ancestral history related to how we talk about enslavement in this country. The unfortunate reality is almost every film, movie, media, magazine article that you read describes experiences of enslavement as Black West Africans that were brought over simply to be laborers to help build a totally new economic system. If you actually indict that even more, how much sense does that make if we had no idea that they actually had the tools, capability, knowledge, intellectual capacity to actually till the soil that's featured here? As you dig into primary source data, though, and understand your own cultural and ancestral history, you begin to quickly realize the number one reason why that specific region was chosen and why those specific individuals were chosen is because of their knowledge, actually, in what we understand to be modern garden tools like the hoe or the rake, and their ability to be utilized with the tilling of soil on the south and southeast coast of the United States. This is why it made perfect sense to leverage the intellectual capacity of these folks. That is a retelling and reclaiming of a very powerful narrative that helps us to avoid simply seeing these people as so-called slaves, but rather viewing it as an action or activity that happened to them, enslavement, brought over as enslaved because of truly their intellectual capacity and capability, not just the strength of their bodies. The more that we begin to understand these experiences, folks, is how we challenge erasure time and again to overcome narratives that we are believed to be taught and that we have to navigate along the way. Something critical that has to exist in the curious mind of business school students. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in your personal life today. Not like that. That's talk show a little later. That's over drinks. What are you reading today?
What am I reading? I just cracked open again for the second time, which should tell you should read it. A book called Joyful Militancy. The title's a little intense, but it's a really good read. I think in summary, it is the best case I've ever read for why friendship is the most powerful tool we have. It's giving mutual aid, it's giving community building, it's giving all the beautiful things. It's also giving how to face yourself when it comes to being real about like facing necessary tensions. And one of the things that that book did for me was help me reframe the word responsibility. So I think that we're taught to consider the word responsibility kind of associated with like obligation.
Yeah.
And in a pre-colonial context, that word refers to our ability to respond. So if you have a high level of responsibility, you have a high capacity to respond to the needs of your community. Yeah. And I think that that really just fueled and filled that word with so much love. Yeah. And so now, whenever I think of friendship, when I think of mutual aid, when I think of community, I think about my responsibility. And in what ways I can respond to just nourish and care for my community.
Love it. Oh, as we wrap our dialogue today, we got a bunch of listening ears and voices here today. What is one piece of advice that you would give to our audience that they can do immediately once they leave this room to understand the power of storytelling, how to build systems connected to storytelling, etc.?
Yes, I think similarly to how I've benefited from my ancestors' stories and my elders' stories, I think one thing you can do is when you leave here today, call the oldest living person in your family and ask them for a story they've never shared with you. I think that you might not see the benefit or reap the benefit immediately, but someday you will.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everybody. Please join me in celebrating.
And now we are in also for a real treat, climate poetry. I'd like to welcome Aya De Leon, current City of Berkeley Poet Laureate and former director of the Poetry for the People program here at UC Berkeley, and also a member of faculty of African American Studies here at the University of California, Berkeley. Please join me in welcoming Aya, please.
Hey, tall girls on the mic. What's up, Haas? It is an honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm going to jump into this piece that I wrote specially for today. It is called Alchemy. Business is 1 part science, 2 parts alchemy. As a poet, I only deal in alchemy, and I am here today because you all want to conjure a world in which our imaginations can find solutions to the climate crisis, innovations, breakthroughs. I want that too. We have brilliant minds in the building. I want to see what you all can dream up. And my biggest wish, my greatest spell, my most overarching yearning for this gathering is that you all had been born 30 or 50 or 100 years earlier, magically knowing what you know now, that we had been having this conversation in 1955 or 1975 or 1995 or even 2005. Because entrepreneurial innovation can no longer save us from climate catastrophe. Not that it's too late for us to be saved, but too late for you to invent and build and iterate something today that can be the magic bullet for the massive mess we've manifested. Market-driven solutions can't be the solution to the problems caused by market-driven economy. You might not want to hear this. This might not be what you were hoping I would offer. The poet laureate is not supposed to be such a downer. You might be mad at me, but I wish you would be mad at the people, really corporations who are not people, who made the decisions, various politicians, that mortgaged the future, global financial institutions, and damaged our climate, fossil fuel industry, that we are fighting for our very survival. You might not want to hear this. Poets get invited to conferences to bring a little creativity, to spice it up. But the problem with poets is that we have a nasty habit of telling the truth. And when a poet laureate is also a climate organizer with the Movement for Black Lives, she might have a little too much truth to tell. Electric cars are killing black people on the African continent who dig out the lithium for batteries, so this solution is killing my people even when the electricity is solar powered, which mostly it is not. Mostly the electricity fueling electric cars is fossil fuels, whose emissions are fueling the climate crisis nearly as much as regular gas cars, so the emissions might be at a coal mine in Wyoming, but they give us a false feeling of superiority in California. You might not want to hear this, but I want you to hear this because I believe in you. I believe in your minds. I believe in the minds in this room because these are the minds that we have. And every opportunity we have to think about this crisis, to think about what can be done is a gift, a treasure, a precious thing. You all have 2 days to put your minds together to think about this impending catastrophe and what needs to be done in terms of business and economy. And the conference promised that, quote, climate change also represents a multi-trillion-dollar business opportunity for forward-thinking business leaders with massive new markets for technology and infrastructure solutions expanding throughout the world. And that's the challenge. You can't come into the climate crisis with a thirst for profit because the drive for profit is what caused the crisis and what maintains the crisis. See, we already have all the solutions we need and they are free. Solar, wind, wave, nature has it all for us. Profiteers need to stop profiting off fossil fuels, but we have yet to develop the political will to take those steps. The idea of a carbon footprint was developed by a New York City-based PR firm working for the fossil fuel industry to lay the responsibility for climate change squarely on the shoulders of individuals, not the corporations who profit or the governments who maintain the infrastructure that makes us all dependent on these products. Consumer choices cannot solve this. We need a sharp U-turn from the consumer-driven economy to an economy that puts human and planetary needs before profits. Some of you might not want to hear this, but I'll bet some of you do. Some of you know this in your hearts. I wish we were having this conversation in 1975, and I wish your minds could be coming up with the solutions that would solve the crisis and make you a truckload of money. And I'm not mad at entrepreneurship. Please come up with some real solution and make all the money. But currently, market-driven solutions are preoccupied with the appearance of alternatives, but they get implemented because they'll make money, and they'll make money because they utilize existing infrastructure and get green-lighted because they don't interrupt the rich and powerful, making themselves richer and more powerful. So the very thing that turns them into money makers is the thing that makes them fail to address the climate crisis at scale. And my challenge to you is to interrupt that cycle, to do the thing that generations of business people have refused to do, put the greater good before your financial interests. Is to look for solutions that put the solution part first, to prioritize innovation that is going to get us to net zero and what is going to get us there fast enough to save the planet or to save the species, and to put the profit last or not at all. Some of you might not want to hear this, but you know who wants to hear this? Your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, and all the children 7 generations into the future. You cannot hand down generational wealth on a ravaged planet. They deserve better. You deserve better. And you, millennial and Gen Z folks, you deserved for the previous generations to do better in the wealthiest nation on the planet. You deserved for the generations before you to put you first before their profit, and they didn't. And your brilliant minds that should be kicking back and generating fabulous solutions that will make your name and bring you prosperity, but instead you're at conferences like this where you have to choose between fueling false solutions or fighting for a solution in a picture that is much more dire than we would want to admit in these bright lecture halls of the global north. You might have some grieving to do. that your future has been compromised, your options have been narrowed, you've been made some promises that previous generations are not in a position to keep. You may not want to hear this, but I implore you, for these 2 days, make the choice for the future. There are no guarantees. If we advocate for economic changes, we face an uphill battle and a ton of opposition. But if we fight for what we know is right, we will be able to look future generations in the eye and tell them honestly, we fought for their lives. We put them first, instead of the illusion that we could save the planet and prop up an extractive economic model at the same time. Don't get me wrong. I want you all to prosper in an economic context where all humans can prosper. So that's your charge, to walk into this conference with your eyes wide open. Thank you.
Aya de Leon, everyone. Thank you. Mark, she put you in a tough spot here, my friend. We have the good fortune of having Mark Arman, the founder and CEO of Replenish, come and talk this panel, or this single speaker, Climate Tech and Circularity. Please join me in welcoming Mark to the stage.
Thank you very much. I run a company called Replenish, and I'm really excited to be here, and I'm grateful for the invitation. I'm especially excited about this event's theme around resilience. In 2007, I went to business school with the sole purpose of learning how to build good business, as I saw it as a tool to make massive impact. So I've been in the sustainability space for about 18 years or so, and I'm here to tell you, next slide. Next slide, please. That sustainability is dead. And it's about time. Now that might sound a little controversial, especially at a climate conference like this, but let me explain. For decades, business has been chasing sustainability, trying to reduce harm, slow decline, mitigate damage. But let me ask you, does anyone here want a sustainable business? A sustainable career? Of course not. We don't want to sustain, we want to grow, regenerate, and thrive. Next slide, please. Let's take a step back and look at the wild. Does the wild merely sustain itself? No. The wild regenerates, adapts, and flourishes. The Grand Canyon isn't sustained. It's the result of continuous transformation. Next slide, please. Kelp forests don't just persist. They create entire ecosystems that rebuild themselves. Next slide. And this breaching whale surely isn't sustainable. If the natural world, next slide, please, sorry. If the natural world thrives through regeneration, shouldn't we be thinking the same way about our businesses, our products, and our economy? Next slide. Oh, sorry, back. You're ahead of me, which is great. Michael Braungart, who wrote The Cradle to Cradle, which I'm sure some of you have read, once asked, if I asked you about your relationship, would you say it's sustainable? No one wants a sustainable relationship. We want relationships that are growing, evolving, and resilient. So why is that the standard for business? Why have we accepted sustainability as the goal when we should be aiming for resilience and regeneration? Next slide. And here's the thing, business leaders are realizing this too. Companies are dismantling their sustainability departments. I see this on a weekly basis. Not because they don't care, but because they need something stronger. Sustainability has been treated as a cost center, a box to check, a compliance requirement. But businesses don't want to survive, they want to thrive. They need supply chain security, long-term stability, and a competitive advantage. Next slide. The other way, please. There we go. So if the natural world regenerates itself, if relationships thrive on growth, if businesses are waking up to resiliency, let's change the way we pitch. The way we pitch matters just as much as the way we build. Sustainability today is a hard sell. Resiliency is a little bit easier. Next slide. So if you want to get funding, if you want customers, if you want to scale, stop pitching sustainability and start pitching resiliency. Here are some of the things that investors and customers actually care about. If you could go back, please. Risk reduction, cost stability, data advantage and intelligence, competitive edge. Next slide, please. I was recently raising funding and an investor asked me, Mark, is this a supply chain play or is this a sustainability play? And my answer was, this is a supply chain play with a regenerative outcome as a byproduct. If I were to answer that in another way, he would have walked. Next slide. So let's solve real business problems, not chase sustainability optics. Customers don't care about your mission statement. They care about how you help them survive and grow. Put yourself in the shoes of your customer. Want to build something that lasts? Solve for resiliency first. Next slide. Here's a great example of resiliency versus sustainability. Novelis is the largest buyer of recycled aluminum cans in the world. They aren't buying because they care about sustainability. They're buying because they don't have enough aluminum to meet their demand. And in fact, they're building a $4 billion plant in Alabama, the first plant of its kind built in 40 years in this country, and they don't have enough aluminum to fill it because we bury 70% of aluminum in this country. So this isn't an ESG play, this is a supply chain crisis. Next slide. And it's a supply chain crisis because we move materials through a medieval system, basically based off a system that was made in 1935 when the Dempster brothers invented the dumpster in Tennessee. And yes, the Dempster brothers did invent the dumpster. It wasn't built for material recovery, it was built for landfilling. And this is what my company is working on, and I have a colleague in the audience, Phoebe Yu, who's a student at Haas Business School. So we're trying to fix the underlying infrastructure problems to solve Novelis' problem of getting more recycled aluminum into their supply chain. Next slide, please. The waste and recycling industry today is completely broken and completely outdated and has completely crazy incentives. Here are some of them. Landfilling is incentivized over recycling. Shipping air is incentivized over optimized logistics. Like I mentioned earlier, recycling is a cost center. There's fragmentation, lack of coordination, no real-time data. So the result is a fragmented, unreliable system that kills circularity before it even starts. Next slide, please. But the future doesn't have to look like this. Circularity is the ultimate resilient supply chain. If we can recover materials at scale, we can eliminate supply chain risk, stabilize pricing, and turn waste into valuable resources. Next slide, please. And here's the cool part, and here's where it comes full circle. This isn't new. Circularity isn't new. It's how the wild has always worked, when waste equals food. It's how indigenous systems were designed. Next slide, please. For centuries, Native communities built systems for long-term abundance, not just sustainability. The future of business will follow the same path. The biggest companies of the next 50 years won't just sustain, they will regenerate. Next slide, please. So to recap, sustainability is dead. If you want to build a climate startup, solve your customers' pain. And in my mind, the best businesses won't just do less harm, they will build entire industries that thrive on circularity. Thank you.